Hi. I'd like to take a little bit of time to explain to you how signed language is a modality of language. We know from brain scans that the same parts of the brain that are active when a hearing person is speaking language are active when a deaf person is using a signed language. Now, the brain scans don't match up exactly, for of course, there are some parts of the brain that are used to process sound that are not used to process vision, and vice versa. But once you get past actually receiving the sounds or receiving the visual input, the rest of what happens in the brain looks pretty similar between sign languages on the one hand and spoken languages on the other. Furthermore, we know that sign languages operate just like spoken languages. That is, sign languages have their own phonology, yes, that's right, phonology, morphology, syntax, pragmatic structure. All the structures that you find in a spoken language, you find in a sign language. Let me just give you an example. You might think that sign languages don't have phonological structure because phonology has to do with how systems of sounds work together. But it turns out that when you break a sign down into its smallest parts, the parts of the signs themselves function just like phonemes do in spoken language. So just as in spoken languages, where the tongue is placed or whether or not the vocal folds are open or closed affect the sound that is used and therefore eventually, once the sounds are put together, the meaning of words. Well, in the same way, whether or not the hand shape is produced with open fingers or closed fingers, whether the palm is facing forward or backward, affects the meaning of a particular sign. Moreover, we know that the sign parts work together just as spoken language phonemes work together. So just as you can have two phonemes that are co-articulated in such a way that sounds blend, in the same way you can have co-articulation of signs. So for example, if you have the sign my followed by the sign father, you'll often see signers sign my father. Now notice that the normal sign for my is with closed fingers. But if the upcoming sign is father with open fingers, you'll often see my signed with open fingers. So what you have here is the sign that you're about to sign affecting the sign that comes before. This is a type of assimilation or co-articulation. That's just one process we see in signed languages. We see morphological, syntactic, pragmatic, semantic processes that parallel spoken languages exactly. Also note that there are different signed languages. We often think of one sign language as if there were some sort of universal sign language, but in fact, the sign language used in the United States is completely different from the sign language used in Great Britain. Even though hearing people in the US speak English and hearing people in Great Britain use English, the sign language used in the US has nothing to do with English, much like the sign language used in Great Britain has very little to do with the structure of spoken English as it's used in Great Britain. So, signers from the United States can't understand signers from Great Britain. On the other hand, signers in Puerto Rico use American Sign Language. So a deaf person from the United States mainland can understand and communicate easily with a deaf person from Puerto Rico, even though they couldn't write the same languages, because deaf people in the continental United States write in English, whereas deaf people in Puerto Rico more than likely write in Spanish. So remember, the sign language is not universal. There are over 140 documented sign languages in the world, and also remember that sign language has nothing to do with spoken language. It is not as if a sign language is a representation of every individual English word. In fact, it's not. Sign languages each have their own unique grammar that are very different from the spoken language grammars of the countries where those sign languages are found. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the section on language modalities so that you can fully understand that sign languages are fully functioning linguistic systems just as any spoken language is.